Hello, my name is Gary, and I was raised in the Western United States, so I'm a native English speaker. I hope that you will enjoy this YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 23. Passepartout's nose grew absurdly long. The next morning, a tired and starving Passepartout told himself he had to find something to eat, no matter what, and the sooner, the better. He thought about selling his watch, but decided he would rather starve first. It was now or never to make use of the strong, if not exactly pleasant, voice that nature had given him. He knew several French and English songs and planned to try them on the Japanese, who must love music. Surely they would appreciate European talent. It was probably too early in the morning to start a concert, and the crowd, rudely awakened from their sleep, might not reward him with coins bearing the Mikado's image. So Passepartout decided to wait a few hours. As he wandered, he realized that he looked far too well dressed for a street performer. The idea hit him to swap his clothes for something more suitable for the role and maybe earn a little money to ease his hunger. With that in mind, he set out to put his plan into action. After a long search, Passepartout found a local shopkeeper selling second-hand clothes. The man liked Passepartout's European outfit, and soon enough, Passepartout left the shop dressed in an old Japanese coat and a faded, lopsided turban. A few small silver coins jingled in his pocket. Perfect, he thought. I'll just pretend it's Carnival. After being Japanesed, as he called it, Passepartout's first priority was to find a modest tea house. There he had breakfast, chicken and rice, like a man who still hadn't figured out where his next meal would come from. Okay, he thought after eating heartily, I need to keep my wits about me. I need to figure out how to get out of this land of the rising sun, which hasn't exactly left me with fond memories, as fast as I can. The idea occurred to him to check out the steamers preparing to leave for America. He could offer his services as a cook or servant in exchange for passage and food. Once in San Francisco, he'd figure out his next move. The real challenge, though, was crossing the 4,700 miles of the Pacific Ocean between Japan and the New World. Passepartout wasn't one to give up on an idea, so he made his way to the docks. But as he got closer, the plan that had seemed so simple began to feel overwhelming. Why would they need a cook or servant on an American steamer? And if they did, what would they think of him in his current outfit? As he pondered these questions, his eyes landed on a huge sign being carried through the streets by a clown-like figure. The sign, written in English, read, Acrobatic Japanese Troupe, Honorable William Battlecar, Owner, Final performances before departing for the United States, featuring the legendary The Long Noses. Don't miss the exciting show. The United States, said Passepartout. That's exactly what I need. He followed the clown and soon found himself back in the Japanese district. About 15 minutes later, he stopped in front of a large building decorated with clusters of streamers. This was the establishment of the Honorable William Battlecar, a Barnum-like figure who managed a troupe of street performers, jugglers, clowns, acrobats, tightrope walkers, and gymnasts. According to the poster, it was their final show before leaving the land of the rising sun for the United States. Passepartout went inside and asked to see Mr. Battlecar, who soon appeared in person. What do you want? Battlecar asked, at first mistaking Passepartout for a local. Do you need a servant, sir? Passepartout asked. A servant, exclaimed Mr. Battlecar, stroking the thick gray beard hanging from his chin. I've already got 2 who are loyal, obedient, and have never left my side. They serve me well, and here they are, he added, flexing his strong arms, veins bulging like the strings of a double bass. So I'm of no use to you? Passepartout asked. None at all. Darn it, I was hoping to cross the Pacific with you. Ah, said the Honorable Mr. Battlecar. You're no more Japanese than I am a monkey. Who are you, dressed like that? A man dresses however he can, replied Passepartout. That's right. You're French, aren't you? Yes, a true Parisian. Then you must know how to make funny faces. Passepartout, slightly annoyed that his nationality led to such a question, replied, "Sure, we French can pull faces, but no better than Americans." "Fair enough. Well, if I can't hire you as a servant, I can take you on as a clown. You see, in France, they like foreign clowns, and abroad, they like French clowns." "Ah," Passepartout responded. "You're pretty strong, right? Especially after a good meal. And can you sing?" "Yes," replied Passepartout, who used to sing in the streets. "But can you sing while standing on your head with a spinning top on your left foot and a sword balanced on your right?" I think I could manage that," Passepartout said, remembering the tricks he had learned in his younger days. "Good enough," said the Honorable William Batulcar. And just like that, the deal was made. Passepartout had finally found a job. He was hired to perform with the famous Japanese troupe. It wasn't the most dignified position, but within a week, he'd be on his way to San Francisco. The performance, which had been so loudly advertised by Mr. Batulcar, was set to start at 3 o'clock. Soon the loud sounds of a Japanese orchestra echoed from the entrance.
Passepartout, despite having no time to practice or rehearse, was assigned to use his strong shoulders to help with the grand finale, a human pyramid performed by the Longnoses in honor of the god Kingao. This was the highlight of the show. Before 3 o'clock, the large shed was filled with spectators, including Europeans, locals, Chinese and Japanese, men, women, and children, who rushed to the narrow benches and boxes facing the stage. Inside, the musicians positioned themselves and energetically played their gongs, tam-tams, flutes, tambourines, and massive drums. The performance resembled typical acrobatic shows, but it must be acknowledged that the Japanese are among the best equilibrists in the world. One performer, using a fan and bits of paper, executed a graceful trick involving butterflies and flowers. Another traced a series of blue words in the air with the fragrant smoke from his pipe, creating a compliment for the audience. A third juggler skillfully handled lighted candles, extinguishing them as they passed his lips and relighting them without missing a beat in his juggling routine. Another performer created fascinating patterns with a spinning top. In his hands, the tops seemed to come alive as they spun endlessly. The jugglers tossed them into the air, hit them like shuttlecocks with wooden paddles, yet they kept spinning. There's no need to elaborate on the amazing feats of the acrobats and gymnasts. Their balancing acts on ladders, poles, balls, barrels, and more were executed with incredible precision. The main attraction was the show featuring the Longnoses, which was something new to Europe. They dressed in a style from the Middle Ages and wore impressive wings on their backs, but what really set them apart were the long noses attached to their faces. These noses were made of bamboo, with some being straight, some curved, some decorated with ribbons, and others even having fake warts. The performers used these long noses, which were securely fastened to their real noses, to perform acrobatic tricks. As the final act, they planned to create a human pyramid. One performer, who usually formed the base, had left the troupe, so Passepartout was chosen to take his place, as only strength and skill were needed. Passepartout felt a bit sad as he put on his colorful costume and attached a fake nose that reminded him of his younger days. However, he felt better knowing this nose could help him earn a meal. He took his position on stage, and then more artists climbed on top of him, forming a tall structure that reached the theater's ceiling. The audience erupted in applause, but just as the loud music started, the pyramid wobbled, and one person from the bottom fell out, causing the entire structure to collapse like a house of cards. It was Passepartout's fault. He panicked, jumped off the stage, and climbed up to the balcony, landing at the feet of one of the spectators. "Ah, my master, he exclaimed. "You're here?" "Yep, it's me." "Great, let's head to the steamer, young man." Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Passepartout left the theater and ran into the furious, honorable Mr. Batulcar, who demanded compensation for the ruined pyramid. Phileas Fogg calmed him down by giving him a handful of cash. At 6:30, just when they were supposed to leave, Mr. Fogg, Euda, and Passepartout, who was still wearing the long nose, boarded the American steamer. Chapter 24, where Mr. Fogg and his group crossed the Pacific Ocean. When the pilot boat came into view near Shanghai, it was clear what would happen next. The signals sent by the Tankadier were spotted by the captain of the Yokohama steamer, who, noticing the flag at half-mast, altered course to meet the smaller vessel. After Phileas Fogg paid John Busby the agreed fare and generously added a bonus of £550, he boarded the steamer with Euda and Fix, and they immediately set off for Nagasaki and Yokohama. They arrived on the morning of November 14th. Fogg wasted no time boarding the Carnatic, where, much to Euda's joy, and possibly his own, though he showed no emotion, they learned that Passepartout, the Frenchman, had indeed arrived the previous day. The steamer to San Francisco was scheduled to leave that evening, making it urgent to locate Passepartout. Fogg searched relentlessly, even visiting the French and English consulates, but found no trace of his missing servant. After wandering through the streets for what felt like hours, he began to lose hope. By chance, or perhaps a gut feeling, he ended up at the theater of the Honorable Mr. Battlecar. He wouldn't have recognized Passepartout in his odd performer's costume, but Passepartout, lying on his back during a performance, spotted his master in the audience. Startled, his reaction caused the pyramid of performers to collapse onto the stage. Passepartout learned everything from Euda, who told him about what had happened during the voyage from Hong Kong to Shanghai on the Tankadier, accompanied by a certain Mr. Fix. When he heard Fix's name, Passepartout didn't show any reaction. He decided that the time hadn't come to reveal to his master what had really happened between him and the detective. Instead, he explained his absence by simply saying that he had gotten drunk after smoking opium at a tavern in Hong Kong. Mr. Fogg listened to this story without any visible reaction and then gave Passepartout the money he needed to buy clothes that were more suitable for his position. The steamer that was about to leave Yokohama for San Francisco belonged to the Pacific Mail Steamship Company and was called the General Grant. It was a large paddle-wheel steamer weighing 2,500 tons, well-equipped and fast. The General Grant also had 3 masts for extra sails, which helped the steam engine. Traveling at 12 miles an hour, it would take 21 days to cross the ocean. Phileas Fogg hoped to reach San Francisco by December 2, New York by the 11th, and London by the 20th, giving him several extra hours before the critical date of December 21. The steamer was fully booked with English passengers, many Americans, a large group of Chinese workers heading to California, and a few East Indian officers enjoying their vacation by traveling around the world. The journey was uneventful. The large paddles kept the ship steady. As usual, Mr. Fogg was calm and quiet. Euda took a deep interest in his journey, growing frustrated with any delays that might slow him down. She often chatted with Passepartout, who, being the most loyal of servants, constantly praised Phileas Fogg's honesty, generosity, and dedication. He took great care to ease Euda's worries about completing the journey successfully, assuring her that the hardest part was behind them. Now that they had passed through the exotic lands of Japan and China, they were well on their way to more familiar, civilized places. A train from San Francisco to New York, followed by a transatlantic steamer to Liverpool, would surely bring them to the end of this seemingly impossible journey around the world within the allotted time. By the 9th day after leaving Yokohama, Phileas Fogg had traveled exactly halfway around the globe. On November 23rd, the General Grant crossed the 180th meridian, placing them directly opposite London. While Mr. Fogg had used 52 of the 80 days to complete his trip, leaving only 28 days, he had already covered 2/3 of the journey. Although geographically he was only halfway, the path ahead was now straightforward, and Fix was no longer around to cause trouble. That same day, Passepartout made a surprising and happy discovery. As you may recall, the stubborn fellow had insisted on keeping his beloved family watch set to London time, ignoring the time zones of the countries they passed through as unreliable. On this particular day, without adjusting the hands, he realized that his watch now matched the ship's chronometers perfectly. His joy was boundless, and he couldn't help but imagine what Fix would say if he were there. "That scoundrel told me all sorts of nonsense," Passepartout said gleefully, "about meridians, the sun, and the moon. Ha! If you listened to people like him, you'd never keep the right time. I knew the sun would eventually get in sync with my watch." Passepartout didn't realize that if his watch displayed time on a 24-hour clock, like the ones in Italy, he wouldn't have had any reason to celebrate. Instead of showing 9 o'clock in the morning, it would show 9 o'clock in the evening, the 21st hour after midnight, which was exactly the time difference between London and the 180th meridian. Even if Fix had explained this simple difference in time, Passepartout wouldn't have accepted it, even if he understood it. Plus, if the detective had been on board at that moment, Passepartout would have confronted him about something else in a much different way. Where was Fix at that time? He was actually on board the General Grant. When he arrived in Yokohama, the detective immediately headed to the English consulate. At last he found the arrest warrant which had followed him from Bombay and arrived on the Carnatic, the very ship Fix was supposed to be on. Imagine his frustration when he realized that the warrant was now useless. Mr. Fogg had left British territory, so he'd have to request extradition. Well, Fix thought, calming down, the warrant isn't valid here, but it will be in England. This crook clearly plans to return home thinking he's escaped the police. Fine, I'll follow him across the Atlantic. As for the money, I just hope some of it's still there. He's already spent more than £5,000 on travel, bribes, bail, elephants, and all sorts of expenses. Yet after all, the bank is rich. Once Fix made up his mind, he boarded the General Grant and was already there when Mr. Fogg and Aouda arrived. To his surprise, he recognized Passepartout, even though he was in a costume. To avoid an awkward confrontation, Fix quickly hid in his cabin, hoping that with so many passengers, Passepartout wouldn't notice him. However, later that same day, they ran into each other on the deck. Without saying a word, Passepartout charged at Fix, grabbed him by the throat, and, to the amusement of some Americans who began betting on the fight, punched him repeatedly. Passepartout's blows clearly showed his superior fighting skills. Once he was done, Passepartout felt much better. Fix, looking a bit disheveled, stood up and calmly asked, "Are you finished?" "For now, yes," replied Passepartout. "Then I need to speak with you," Fix said. "But It's about your master." Passepartout, taken aback by Fix's calmness, followed him, and they sat away from the other passengers. "You beat me up," Fix began. "Fair enough. I expected it. But hear me out. Until now, I've been working against Mr. Fogg, but now I'm on his side." "Aha!" Passepartout exclaimed. "You finally believe he's an honest man." "No," Fix replied coldly. "I still think he's a crook. But listen, as long as Mr. Fogg was on British soil, I needed to stall him until my arrest warrant arrived. I did everything I could to delay him. I set the Bombay priests on him. I got you drunk in Hong Kong. I separated you from him. And I even made him miss the steamer to Yokohama." Passepartout listened, clenching his fists. "But now," Fix continued, "since Mr. Fogg seems to be heading back to England, I'm going to follow him and help him get there without any more delays. My goal has changed, and it's in my best interest now to see him succeed. Your interest is the same as mine. Only in England will you find out if your master is a criminal or an honest man." Passepartout listened carefully and believed that Fix was being honest. "Are we friends?" Fix asked. "Friends? No," Passepartout replied, "but maybe allies. If you betray us, though, I'll break your neck." "Deal," said Fix calmly. 11 days later, on December 3rd, the General Grant entered the Golden Gate and reached San Francisco. Mr. Fogg had neither gained nor lost any time.